They thought a few cheap orange traffic cones were enough to block the access to my own home. Petty, final, suffocating move by a tyrannical HOA board, convinced of their untouchable authority. What they didn't know was that while they were playing with plastic, I was meticulously crafting a legal, financial, and procedural guillotine. In the end, it wasn't just the cones that were removed. It was the devastating removal and permanent banning of every single member of the Highland Estates HOA board, leaving them liable for 7 years of fraudulent governance. This isn't just a win. This is the ultimate weaponized revenge. You will not believe the sheer audacity of this HOA. If you've ever had a neighbor or a board member think they own you, you need to hear this story. Smash that like button, subscribe right now for more high-stakes property drama, and let us know in the comments, would you have fought back this hard? Welcome back, drama fans, to the channel where we serve up justice, piping hot and on a silver platter. Our protagonist, let's call him Alex, had found his little slice of suburban heaven in the meticulously manicured development of Highland Estates. It wasn't the cheapest place, but the amenities and the promise of a quiet life, regulated by an organized homeowners association, seemed worth the premium. Now, enter the antagonist, the self-proclaimed Empress of Highland Estates, President Carol Vance. Carol, a woman whose entire identity was seemingly wrapped up in her board position, had an almost pathological need for control. Viewing the community covenants not as guidelines but as personal decrees. The initial conflict, pathetic, truly. Alex, a passionate but pragmatic home mechanic, had installed a small custom, professional-grade car lift in the spacious third bay of his garage, a lift entirely out of sight, entirely behind a closed, insulated door. The HOA covenant stipulated that all business or industrial activities were strictly prohibited, but Alex, software engineer who simply enjoyed restoring classic cars as a hobby, was operating firmly within the lines of personal leisure activity, a distinction clearly drawn in the subclauses of Article 5, Section C. Carol, however, saw the sight of a slightly raised garage door for 30 seconds on a Tuesday afternoon as an existential threat to the aesthetic integrity of her domain. The first shot fired was a certified letter, not a friendly warning, but a demand for immediate removal of the industrial equipment, citing a fine of $50 per day until compliance. Alex, irritated but compliant with procedural fairness, responded with a 5-page, meticulously footnoted rebuttal, quoting the very covenants Carol cited, along with zoning ordinances, proving his car lift was legally and procedurally fine. He thought that would be the end of it, a minor skirmish, quickly resolved by logic. He was wrong. Carol and her two loyal board cronies, Vice President Ken and Treasurer Brenda, saw the rebuttal not as a defense, but as an act of defiance, and they decided to take this personal. The final paragraph of their next letter, delivered via hand-delivered slightly damp envelope, was chilling. Failure to cease the use of the prohibited equipment and remit all accrued fines within 72 hours will result in the immediate revocation of all community amenity access and the commencement of proceedings to place a lien on the property. The war had just started, and Alex knew he was dealing with true irrational malice. Alex held his ground, continuing his hobby, ignoring the baseless threats. The fines stacked up, but he meticulously archived every notice, every response, every procedural error the board made. He was preparing for court, confident that a judge would laugh the case out of existence. But Carol, remember, wasn't interested in legality. She was interested in power. The real escalation came on a Friday afternoon. Alex was due to leave for a week-long work trip. As he packed his car in the driveway, he watched in stunned silence as a white pickup truck, bearing the Highland Estates landscaping logo, pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Carol, Ken, and Brenda, along with two confusedlooking landscapers. Carol, holding a clipboard like a royal scepter, directed the men to unload not bags of mulch, but a dozen bright orange 4-foot-tall construction-grade traffic cones. In front of Alex, in a grotesque, deliberate act of pure petty tyranny, Carol instructed the men to form a solid, impassable line across the entire width of Alex's driveway apron, effectively blocking his vehicle from leaving or returning to his home. She cited a newly interpreted bylaw Article 3, Section G, which dealt with unsanctioned material storage. claiming that Alex's car itself being partially disassembled for restoration in his garage constituted unsanctioned material, and therefore the driveway was closed for remediation. The entire justification was unadulterated nonsense, a twisted circular logic designed solely to create a physical blockade. Alex confronted her, his voice shaking with disbelief and rage. "Carol, you cannot legally block access to my property. That's trespass and obstruction of egress." Carol simply smiled, a cold reptilian expression. "The board has voted unanimously, Alex. These cones are placed entirely on association property, according to the plat map. They are a temporary safety measure. You are free to park your non-violating vehicles in the overflow lot, a delightful 10-minute walk away." She then slapped a final official-looking notice onto his windshield. "Driveway access revoked, violation 5, C industrial activity, effective immediately." He was trapped. His flight was in 3 hours. His car was immobilized, and the board members stood there, smugly watching. Alex had to call a friend for a ride to the airport, leaving his home essentially under siege, unable to fight back immediately. The feeling of helplessness, of watching a petty tyrant literally wall off his property based on a lie, was agonizing. He left knowing that upon his return, the war would become absolute. The HOA had crossed a red line, moving from paper threats to actual physical interference with his life. A week later, Alex returned, his rage having settled into cold, analytical focus. The cones were still there, a monument to the board's arrogance. The first step was to get the car out, which he did by simply moving the cones and then photographing the board's immediate attempt to replace them. A crucial piece of evidence. But this was no longer about the car lift or the cones. It was about destroying the board's authority permanently. Alex realized their biggest vulnerability was their obsession with the rules, specifically their utter failure to follow them when it suited them. He spent days poring over the 300-page HOA Declaration of Covenants, conditions and restrictions, CC&Rs, the bylaws, and, critically, the Articles of Incorporation. He found it. Article She, Section 4. Any change to the communities. Declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or the imposition of new fees, or the substantive reinterpretation of existing rules that results in a material adverse effect on a member's property rights, must be ratified by a 2/3 majority of the total membership via a formal documented vote taken at a duly called special meeting. The new interpretation Carol used to block his driveway is never ratified. The massive daily fines, never ratified. It was all a procedural phantom. Then came the nuclear option. Alex dug into the board's meeting minutes and financial statements, documents he was entitled to as a homeowner. Article 4, Section 2. No board member may hold an office for more than 2 consecutive 3-year terms. Carol Vance. She was in her 9th year, having circumvented the rule with a staged resignation and immediate re-election loophole that was never documented or approved by the general membership. And the real killer, Article 9, Section 3, the failure to perform clause, which stated that any board member who commits a willful and knowing violation of the CC and Rs, resulting in financial harm to the association, or a member may be subject to immediate removal by petition. Alex mobilized. Spent a weekend compiling an evidence binder, the photos of the cones, the unratified fine notices, the financial ledger showing funds allocated without a quorum, and the evidence of Carol's illegal term extension. He had the case. He then drafted a petition for the immediate emergency removal of Carol, Ken, and Brenda for procedural fraud, misappropriation of community funds. Small, the fallout was instantaneous and delicious. The county and state authorities, alerted by the new temporary board that Alex helped install, descended on Highland Estates. The immediate consequence for Carol, Ken, and Brenda wasn't just a loss of their little kingdom. It was financial ruin. Because Alex's petition cited willful and knowing violation. The former board members lost the protection of the HOA's directors and officers' D&O liability insurance. The long-term aftermath solidified Alex's victory. He refused to join the new board, preferring to act as a community consultant, ensuring that the rules were enforced fairly and legally. The community atmosphere changed overnight. Neighbors started talking again, unburdened by the constant fear of arbitrary fines. The car lift? It remained, now officially confirmed as a personal leisure activity by a ratified, fully transparent board vote. But the final nail in Carol Vance's coffin was pure, calculated revenge. In the civil suit against her, the judge ruled in favor of the HOA, finding Carol liable for the largest share of the illegally amassed funds. Unable to pay the judgment, the ultimate irony materialized. The HOA, using the authority of the court order, placed a lien on Carol Vance's property. 6 months later, unable to service the debt and pay her mortgage, Carol was forced to sell her home, the home she had lorded over, the seat of her tyrannical power. The new owners, a lovely young family, promptly asked Alex for a favor. Knowing Carol was moving out that day. Alex drove his perfectly restored classic car out of his garage, giving the new owners a tour of the now sanctioned, beautiful car lift just as the moving van pulled away from Carol's house. As she drove off for the final time, forced to leave the community she thought she owned, her last sight was Alex. The man she tried to silence with orange cones, now celebrating his hobby in a community finally free of her control. Justice was served, the rulebook was the weapon. The HOA's tyrant was successfully evicted, the victim of her own twisted, illegal game. Boom. That is how you use the law to utterly demolish a bully. I need to know, what was the most shocking, most satisfying moment of Alex's revenge? Drop a comment below. Is it the immediate board removal, or the final, permanent banning? Hit that like button if you think Carol got exactly what she deserved. And make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next legendary HOA showdown.